What you're about to discover might transform forever how you see life, consciousness, and the path of human awakening. What if I told you that behind the recorded events of Christ's life exists a hidden code, a symbolic and silent map, imprinted not in scrolls but in the very flesh and steps of a man who came not merely to save but to awaken? What happens after the last breath? What lies beyond the death of the ego, the collapse of certainties, the rupture with what we call I? What if each moment of Jesus' life were actually a key, a step, a rite of passage, not as dogma but as living revelation, a roadmap carved into the human soul so that one day those with eyes to see and ears to hear could remember who they really are? Among countless spiritual narratives, few carry as much mystery as the number 33. Age of Jesus at crucifixion, maximum degree in Masonic hierarchy, exact number of vertebrae in our spine through which Kundalini energy rises. Coincidence or divine synchronicity? Each tradition from east to west whispers the same thing: ascension. What if these 33 degrees are actually the internal process through which every awakened human being must pass, a map to illumination hidden in plain sight? Perhaps the true sacred book isn't found in ancient texts or stone temples. Perhaps it's written in gestures, silences, confrontations, surrenders. Jesus didn't come to found a religion. He embodied a possibility. He lived a path that begins in inner chaos and culminates in the dissolution of ego into pure light. A path few dare walk because it demands more than faith. It demands courage to die daily, die to the masks, the roles, the fears, the illusions. Here the silent invitation resonates. Is this same path still available? Are the steps he took mirrors of our own? Are we ready to accept that perhaps we're lost not in the world but from ourselves? This video is more than reflection. It's a crossing, a profound call to remember that illumination isn't a privilege of saints but a birthright of the soul. The life of Jesus with its highs and lows isn't just an external gospel but an internal manual, a secret roadmap pulsing within each of us. Now more than ever, it begins to be revealed. Are you ready to walk beyond the veil, to strip away the known and touch eternity with your own feet? Have you ever had the strange sensation that something invisible is trying to wake you up? As if life, amid chaos and routine, were whispering a secret message, almost imperceptible yet impossible to ignore? For many, this manifests as silent discomfort, a feeling that this can't be all there is. This is the call, not the one full of lights and certainties but the one pulsing in silence where truths we avoid reside. This call doesn't come with trumpets or promises of paradise. It arrives when everything seems to crumble. When relationships lose meaning, work suffocates, and the identity constructed with such effort begins to crack. In this instant the soul screams. But the scream isn't loud. It's a deafening emptiness. As if the outer world continued functioning but something inside you had stopped. Here begins the first step, awakening. Not as mystical illumination but as collapse, the breaking of the illusion that everything was under control. Jesus, still a boy, already showed signs of this call. "Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business?" he said at only 12 years old, already conscious of a mission that distanced him from social expectations. He didn't flee the world but also didn't mold himself to it. This first step demands exactly that, abandoning the comfort of blind obedience and diving into the abyss of the unknown. Here's where things get stranger. This discomfort, this sensation of displacement isn't a system error. It's the spiritual system operating perfectly. Like a seed that cracks to sprout, the soul needs to break old shells. This cracking is painful because identity begins to dissolve. We question everything: the religion we inherited, the values we follow, the paths we've walked. The world begins to seem like a poorly staged play and you, an actor tired of performing. This restlessness isn't madness. It's the beginning of lucidity. What separates those who continue forward from those who return to comfort zones isn't strength but surrender. Jesus didn't try convincing anyone. He simply followed with silent, firm steps. A call only he could hear. This call exists in you too. Ignoring it is suffocating your own soul, like trying to live with eyes closed in a world begging to be seen with the heart. Are these subtle signs we feel, coincidences, intuitions, crises, really just random chance? Or are they trying to conduct us toward a path already walked, lived, and left as legacy by someone who profoundly understood what it means to be human and divine simultaneously? That's where the point of no return lies. When something in you awakens, you never sleep the same way again. Awakening hurts because the old world doesn't recognize you anymore and the new hasn't arrived yet. It's the in-between place of the soul, the fertile void. In it, the first steps begin not with feet but with consciousness. But before continuing, tell me, what if everything you've lived until now, even the pain, were part of a plan to reconduce you to your forgotten essence? This invisible call doesn't choose the most prepared. It chooses the most available. It doesn't care how many books you've read, how many courses you've taken, how good your spiritual performance is. It wants to know if you're willing to descend, to look with tenderness at your own abysses, to touch your own wounds without fleeing, to strip yourself of everything you thought you were. Then something extraordinary begins to happen. You stop seeking miracles and start perceiving that the miracle is being alive with the soul's eyes open. Daily life gains another texture. A simple glance can carry compassion. A silence can contain truths. A gesture can transform an environment. Jesus began his journey not at a pulpit but in the desert, not before multitudes but in emptiness. This is the inverse path of what the world teaches us. Because before conquering anything, you must lose what isn't real. Spiritual awakening isn't a personality upgrade. It's the bankruptcy of the character. It's the beginning of true presence. What if this discomfort you feel now isn't the end but the harbinger of a birth? Are you ready to follow this invisible thread that can reconnect you with everything you always were but had forgotten? The soul that has awakened no longer satisfies itself with ready answers. What once sufficed now unsettles. What seems certain begins to sound false. At this point, the path demands more than sensitivity. It demands courage because after the call comes the crossing. Every real crossing passes through a desert, a place without shortcuts, without distractions, without echo of external voices, only the deafening silence of one's own presence. Jesus didn't begin his mission among crowds. He went to the desert for 40 days, faced the heat, solitude, and his own phantoms. Not to prove something to others but to confront himself. This is exactly what the second step demands of us. Stop fleeing what we carry inside. The shadow, this rejected, feared, buried side, isn't an enemy. It's a mirror. The true spiritual warrior is one who faces this mirror without blinking. Here's where everything begins to hurt more deeply. In the desert, Jesus was tempted not by exterior entities but by internal voices that echo in all of us. The desire for power, the appeal of recognition, the will to control one's own destiny. These temptations aren't sins in the moral sense. They're ego archetypes, internal structures that keep us trapped in the world of appearance. The only way to overcome them isn't with force but with presence. Because the ego shouts but the soul whispers. Most people don't flee pain. They flee emptiness. Because in emptiness all masks fall. In silence everything that was repressed begins to rise. Anger, fear, guilt, sadness, shame, everything emerges. But here's where the true inner alchemist enters action, not to combat these emotions but to integrate them. Light doesn't defeat shadow through negation but through inclusion. Then something magical begins to happen. Pain stops being punishment and becomes teacher. Each wound transforms into a portal, each fall into a lesson. The spiritual desert isn't punishment. It's a sacred laboratory where the human being reunites with their essence stripped of ornaments. What before seemed like loss now reveals itself as purification. Are you ready to enter this interior desert? Few accept this invitation because it promises no glories, only truths. Truth when we're still trapped in ego hurts, but pain at this stage is no longer something to avoid. It's a rite of passage. Jesus, by refusing ego's illusions, showed that true strength isn't in dominating the world but in not being dominated by it. This is spiritual revolution. This is freedom. In the desert you learn you're not your conquests, your titles, not even your apparent spirituality. You're the space where all this happens. When this understanding touches the soul, something new is born. Radical humility, the kind that doesn't kneel from submission but from reverence to the truth itself beginning to reveal itself. The journey deepens and with it clarity. You perceive that enemies were never outside. They were always parts of yourself crying out for light. Here forgiveness is born, not as a moral act but as internal liberation. You stop warring against yourself, stop demanding perfection, begin to welcome, embrace, integrate. But the crossing isn't finished yet. This stage is marked by a powerful paradox. The more you know yourself, the more you empty. The ego gradually dissolves like a shell that fulfilled its role. The soul begins to breathe without weight, without hurry, without need to prove anything. Jesus didn't leave the desert displaying miracles. He left in silence, with the authority of one who conquered himself. Have you had the courage to enter your own desert? Have you felt that the greatest battle isn't against the world but against the silent pacts you made with your own pain? What if everything you avoided facing is exactly what's preventing you from being who you were born to be? Something changes profoundly after the desert crossing, not spectacularly but silently. It's as if a veil were removed from the soul's eyes and for the first time the world were seen without filters. What before was other is now extension of self. What was another's pain now pulses in one's own chest. A new type of perception emerges, one that doesn't come from mind but from awakened heart. At this stage of the journey, Jesus didn't just teach about love. He was love itself in movement. He touched the untouchables, welcomed the rejected, listened to the silenced. His presence didn't judge. It simply embraced. This fusion with the whole begins to emerge in those who walk the soul's steps. You no longer love because you should love but because you can't not love. Love stops being choice. It becomes nature. Here's where things get even deeper. This love isn't sweet all the time. It's fierce when it needs to break patterns. It's firm when it needs to say no with truth. It's free and therefore disturbs those still living in control's prison. Jesus wasn't accepted by everyone and didn't try to be because real love doesn't seek to please. It seeks to liberate, and liberating implies deconstructing. This love is medicine, healing, but also surgical. It touches where it hurts to heal where it wounds. At this point, spirituality stops being concept and becomes vibration. You begin transforming environments not through what you say but through what you emanate. Your presence becomes witness to what's possible. You no longer live to be someone but to be a channel. This changes everything. The world stops being a battlefield and becomes an altar where each gesture becomes an offering. Are you willing to love even when there's no reciprocity? Here the heart becomes the new center of existence. The mind no longer governs as before. It yields space to feeling, intuiting, vibrating. This change changes the world because everything outside is reflection of what's inside. When the heart aligns with the whole, the universe responds with synchronicity, clarity, direction. Not because life became perfect but because you stopped fighting against it. Jesus washed the disciples' feet. A simple gesture but of profound wisdom. He taught us that serving is reigning in consciousness's kingdom, that the highest love manifests in the humblest details. There's no more separation between sacred and mundane. Universal love doesn't choose. It includes. It touches the marginalized, forgives the traitor, heals the excluded, because it knows every being carries within a forgotten but never lost spark. This stage is the beginning of a silent revolution. You stop seeking validation because you understand there's no longer anyone to validate. You are, and that suffices. The soul once suffocated now expands in each gesture, each word, each glance. What before seemed small, a conversation, a hug, shared silence, becomes sacrament. But attention, the ego still tries to return. It whispers you're doing too much, feeling too much, exposing yourself too much. But now you know it's just an echo, no longer truth. The love that installs itself at this point in the journey is non-negotiable. It doesn't adapt to conventions. It breaks with fear and dances with freedom. Because where true love exists, there's no control, only trust. Have you felt this? A love that no longer fits inside the chest, that doesn't demand return, that doesn't negotiate its essence? What if this love is the most revolutionary force you can offer the world? What would happen if you allowed it to guide each step from now on? A moment arrives in the journey when there's nothing more to do, to conquer, to improve. An instant when all questions dissolve in silence and the frantic search surrenders to the quietness of simply being. Here true birth happens, not of a new character but of the essence always hidden under the rubble of identity. This is the point where the illuminated being doesn't become something more but everything it always was. This is exactly why few arrive here, because the final stage of the walk demands the death of everything still keeping you separated from Source. Death of the ideal of yourself, death of expectations, death of the very idea of illumination. Jesus lived this with absolute intensity. In Gethsemane he sweated blood. Atop the cross he cried abandonment. Not because he doubted but because he was crossing the final veil, that of total separation. But in this cry the deepest silence is born. The illuminated being isn't one who shines in the world's eyes but one who dissolved to such a point that their presence no longer needs to be noticed to be transformative. They no longer carry the need to be something. They simply are, and in this being so simple, so raw, so essential resides true strength, that of no longer needing to resist. Are you prepared to disappear as ego to finally appear as light? This dissolution isn't abandonment. It's integration. When the I stops being center, the whole manifests. Separation between sacred and mundane evaporates. Compassion, once an effort, becomes natural state. Wisdom, once sought, becomes a frequency. There's no more hurry, no more fear. Everything flows in the harmony of one who knows they've already arrived, not at a destination but at a state of eternal presence. Jesus resurrects but not as before. He returns as one who surpassed form's limits. He appears, disappears, speaks little, but each word opens portals because his identity now is field. He no longer needs to teach. His presence teaches. He no longer needs to prove. His vibration proves. He no longer carries the cross. He became the bridge. At this stage, life stops being divided between spiritual and common moments. Everything is prayer, silence, breathing, walking. Everything is service, not from obligation but from naturalness. The illuminated one doesn't try changing the world. They embody a new world and therefore transform. Here's where things become even more subtle, because the illuminated being no longer defines themselves by anything. They don't say I am this or that. They become a space where everything can happen. Their language is vibration. Their gesture is prayer. Their listening is healing, and their life is the message, no longer written in books but engraved in shared silences and glances that touch the soul. Can you imagine what it would be to live without needing to be someone anymore? It's the final freedom, the one that doesn't come from doing what you want but from no longer needing to want anything, the freedom of living in communion with everything, even with pain. Because even pain at this point is received as teacher. Nothing is fled. Everything is embraced. Everything is sacred. The birth of the illuminated being isn't a spectacle. It's a return, a reunion, a profound remembering. There's no more ecstasy, only peace, a peace so real it silences even the need for explanations. There's no more urgency to teach. There's only the desire to be, because being now is whole, pure, divine. What if true illumination is less about lighting up and more about allowing yourself to disappear into the vastness of what we always were? Are you ready to stop seeking and finally be?